Good evening. Can you hear me? Oh. It is a great privilege and pleasure for all of us at the K.R. Kama Oriental Institute to welcome all of you to this wonderful event when we will be presenting and releasing the book which Dr. Farokh Udwadia has written, titled Rivalry Between the Parthian and Sasanian Persian Empires and Rome, the Rise and Fall of the Sasanian Empire. After this book was ready, we requested Dr. Udwadia to come and speak on this book and on the subject which is contained in this particular book. And we are delighted to have him here. I may mention that in 2019, Dr. Udwadia had published another first book with us on the rise and fall of the Achaemenid Empire. And from that time, in fact, he became interested in doing this second book, which took a very long time, which involved a great deal of research, collecting of material, and this particular book is before you. So I will not speak too much, but I would like to introduce to you our president, Mr. Homa Petit, who will be subsequently chairing this function. Many of you would be knowing Mr. Petit as the president of, not only the chairman of the K.R. Kama Oriental Institute, but also as the president of the B.D. Petit Parsi General Hospital, the Bai Sagarbai Animal Hospital, and other such institutions. He is an eminent solicitor with a very distinguished career in the field of law in its very many manifestations. And presently he is advisor to the LNR group and is very active and guides us constantly in the activities of the K.R. Kama Oriental Institute. May I request Mr. Petit to now take over the proceedings?
Dignitaries on the dais, friends, ladies and gentlemen. This evening I have the privilege of introducing someone whose professional journey can best be described as a lifelong mission to keep the rest of us alive. Dr. Farokh Udwadia has spent a lifetime ensuring that the rest of us continue to have a lifetime. He's not only a colossus, but a legend in his lifetime. Farokh, if I can refer to you as Farokh, is not only an eminent professor of medicine at the Grant Medical College of the JJ Group, but is also a senior medical consultant at the B.D. Petit Parsi General Hospital and the Bridge Candy Hospital at Mumbai. He has authored more than 60 scientific papers and has written several books, including standard universal reference texts. He has authored many non-medical books, and as Nawaz mentioned earlier, our institute has been privileged to publish 2 of his earlier books. He has recently made a debut as a playwright with the one-act play titled Ogama. which is a tribute to his hero, Albert Schweitzer. Many doctors are respected, some are admired, but only a few are decorated by the nation itself. And among those rare few is Farokh, who has received the Padma Bhushan Award. This is a recognition which speaks not only of his excellence in medicine, but also a lifetime of service to the society. Rarely does one come across a human being who is so versatile and accomplished as an all-round human being who combines not only medicine, but also combines it with music, history, and arts, and is also a loving family man with a heart for the poor. I have personal experience as the president of the B.D. Petit Passy General Hospital that whether a patient is rich or poor or free, if he requires Farokh to come to take a round even in the middle of the night or in an emergency, he is always there. What makes Farokh truly remarkable is not only his scientific brilliance, but his human touch. A man with a stern exterior, but with a soft heart, and most importantly, a caring and humanitarian physician with a great sense of humor. Undoubtedly, he is not only a messiah who has given a second life to many with his experience and accurate diagnosis. Patients trust him implicitly, and his colleagues also seek his counsel constantly. It is therefore my honor and privilege to welcome a healer, a scholar, an award-winning contributor to medicine, and above all, a person who continues to elevate the profession with grace and humility. I will not stand anymore before you and the release of the book, and then over to Dr. Udwadia for his talk, for which you all are eagerly awaiting. Thank you.
Mr. Homa Petit, Dr. Modi, my friend Darius, I've known him since he was a kid, Mr. Mukherjee. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to speak to you on a difficult period of antiquity and Middle Age, which has really not been well researched upon. I wish to start as a backdrop a few lines on the Achaemenid Empire. The Achaemenid Empire was the greatest Persian empire that ever was the first universal state in the world, stretching from the Nile in the east, in the west, to the Indus in the east, stretching down to the belly of Asia. It was founded by Cyrus the Great in 550 BC, and it was destroyed by Alexander the Great in 331 BC. Yes, he was a great warrior, he was a great general, and he fought from the front with his soldiers. But according to the Zoroastrians, he was a devil incarnate. Why? Because he went into the empire with the sole purpose of conquest, plunder, pillage. He destroyed the fire temples of the ancient Persians. He killed the magi, the priests. He desecrated the temples. And what is more, he ultimately set fire to one of the greatest capitals the world had ever seen, and perhaps will ever see, Persepolis. Now when he died, he left the greater part of the plateau of the Persian plateau to his generals, and the most important general was a general called General Seleucid. He ruled for about almost 150 years. And then, between the river Oxus and the Jaxartes, a Persian tribe of very hardy warriors to go and fight the Seleucids. They wrested the province of Parthia from them first. And that's why we are talking about the Parthians. Then they went east and west, expanded east and west. And in the west, they came across the aggressive, advancing Roman Empire. It was the most advancing and the most, the most ambitious of empires, always wanting to expand. They came to a treaty where the Euphrates was the dividing line between the Roman Empire and the Parthians. The Parthians respected that frontier, but the Romans didn't. They didn't think much of the Parthians. After all, they were Romans, they were superior. That was an attitude they had, and they continued to have for a long time. By the way, this treaty was, I remember, signed in 69 BC. From 70 BC, I must take you to Rome now, from 70 BC to 54 BC, Rome was in turmoil. There were civil wars. Rome was torn asunder. Clans fought with each other. Rebellions took place. And out of this end of the civil war emerged Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, who ultimately became a dictator and who, as you know, was assassinated by the Romans in the Senate. And there at the foot of Pompey's statue, which all the while ran blood, great Caesar fell. Those are the words of Shakespeare. Now, I must take you further back. I must take you further back and give you the agony of the dying Roman Senate. At that time, Rome was ruled by a triumvirate. The triumvirate was Caesar, Julius Caesar, Pompey, and a man called Crassus. Now, Julius Caesar was a great warrior, great general. He'd won many battles in the West and had done a lot for Rome in the West, and Pompey had done the same in the East. But Crassus was a very, very rich man. He had helped to quell the riots in Rome. He had quelled the riots of the slaves led by Spartacus. But he had no real military conquests. He was a very rich man who had his own legions, and he decided that he would seek glory by invading Parthia. So with his legions, Roman legions, he invades, crosses the line, crosses the dividing line and goes into Parthia. The Parthians were expecting them. They were expert horsemen. They were very good with the bow and arrow, and they were great fighters. When they crossed into their land, the Parthians with their arrows rained a hail of arrows on them, as if the sky had opened and it was raining arrows. Though they had shields on their body and had a helmet, their arms were bare, and they were badly wounded, and many died. They formed what is called a tetsubo. A tetsubo is where the soldiers lock their shields to protect themselves. But when this happens, the legion cannot move, the soldiers cannot move. And they were at the mercy of the cavalry of the Parthians. They were in a bad shape, the Romans. Crassus asks his son Pluvius to try and drive away the archers. He tries to do so. The Parthians, while retiring, gave them the Parthian shot, which is they fire their arrows from the back whilst on horseback, the proverbial Parthian shot. Publius, his son, dies. Crassus asks for a parley with the Parthians. Suren was the general of the Parthians. That was granted. There was an acrimonious argument in which Cassius was killed, as were his generals, and after that, all the soldiers of the Romans were massacred. This was the greatest ever defeat of the Romans. They had never had a loss as bad as this. Now let's go further. After the death of Julius Caesar, within a short while, the Republic dies, and the Roman Empire becomes a monarchy. Augustus I was the first emperor. I think he was probably the greatest emperor. Whilst Augustus was there, he made a treaty with the Parthians. He said, we promise not to invade your land again on one condition. And what was that condition? You return all the standards that you have captured in the Battle of Carrhae. It was something which they could not forget. So the Parthians said, all right. They returned all the standards. Augustus kept his word. There were no incursions. But after Augustus, the other emperors, there was Hadrian. There were others. There was Marcus Aurelius. There was Caracalla, an emperor who gathered a huge army again and attacked Parthia. The Parthians again defeated them. For the first time, the West also knew that the legions of Rome were not invincible. After the Battle of Caracalla, after the battle in which the Parthians defeated the legions of Caracalla, there was peace. But hardly had peace ensued where there was a seismic tremor. I looked at those two words, they're not mine. They're borrowed. A seismic tremor in Parthia. In the province of Pars in southern Persia, a noble prince named Ardesha decided to challenge the Parthians. He challenged the Parthians and he decided that he would attack the Parthian Empire and replace it with the Sasanian Empire. He was the man who founded the Sasanian Empire. He reinforced the Sasanian Empire. He established and expanded the Sasanian Empire. The last battle between Ardesha and the Parthians is what is worth describing. I won't go into detail, but the Parthians lost the battle, although they vastly outnumbered Ardesha and his troops. It is believed that the last blow to the Parthian king was delivered by Ardesha himself. Ardesha wins, He goes into Ctesiphon, which was the capital of Parthia and was again the capital of the Sasanian Empire as well, and is crowned as king. Shah, king of kings, ordained by Ahura Mazda, the supreme being of the Zoroastrian kingdom. He becomes king, and the first thing he does, he challenges the Roman Empire. He says, you have conquered or you have taken away the land of my ancestors. They are our land, and we shall take them back. The Romans, however, thought he was an upstart. They sent their emperor and asked him to try and see if they could subdue him. The emperor at that time, I remember, was Servus Alexander. He had a three-pronged attack on Ardeshir. Ardeshir not only repulsed him, but defeated him. It's amazing that the first kings of the Sasanian Empire really never lost a battle. Ardeshir never lost a battle. He got back the frontier towns, which were forts between the Euphrates and the Tigris. He took Armenia, he took Cappadocia, he took Syria. And he passed on his empire to son, Shabu I. Shabu I was probably the greatest warrior, one of the greatest warriors of the Sasanian Empire. I won't describe his battles, but I'll describe two important things that he was capable of doing. One was the Roman emperor, a young man of about 18, called Jordan III, took his army and tried to fight him. And in that fight, of course, he lost. Shabu I won, but the most important thing, Jordan the emperor was killed in battle. It was the first time in history that a Roman emperor was killed in battle. Not only was he killed in battle, Philip the Arab, who was the head of the Praetorian Guard, that's a very great post, was a great post in Rome. Next to the emperor, the most important one was the head of the Praetorian Guard. He had to pay a huge indemnity to Shabu to allow the Roman soldiers to go back to Rome. Then came Emperor Valerian all the way from Rome, again with an army to destroy the Erach Sasanian Empire. He was defeated, and the strange part of it, in battle, Valerian was the person who was caught prisoner by Shabu himself. Personally, he was caught as a prisoner by Shabu. So these were two things that are extremely unusual, never experienced by the Roman Empire before. Now, Shabu was not just a great warrior, he was also a great builder. Roman captives, people from all over came flocked to him. Great towns to build. I can name just two very important ones. One was called Gundi Shapur. It was a place of learning, which stood all the way till the time of the Arab invasion. It was a center for medicine, by the way, and it was a place where many people from east and even west flocked to study. It had one of the best libraries at that time in the world. So that was Shabu the first. And then came a group of emperors whom I don't wish to speak on at great length. There were Bairams, the three Bairams, and Narses. The only important thing that happened there, that the clergy and the Zoroastrian chief clergyman called Kerdir decided to seek more influence, and indeed they did so. They influenced the king. There was, in fact, a little tussle between the monarchy and the religious fraternity. Shabu was strong enough to curb that, but the others felt that the clergy, particularly the chief religious person called Kerdir, was getting a lot more power. Now I must tell you one thing before I get on to the next century. I shall speak by century by century. This was the 3rd century. The reign of Shabu the first, advent of Mani the prophet. Mani the prophet came from Mesopotamia. He was from a very aristocratic family. They are Skaldids, the kings of the Parthians. He was from that family. He had a revelation. And he went to Shabu's court. Shapur gave him full permission to preach what he wanted, as he wanted, not only in his capital, but all over his Persian dominions, which he very easily did. He went all over, not only to India, but to Asia, all over. His doctrine was rather odd. It was rather dark. He believed in the good and the bad, as the Zoroastrians did. It was a mixture of Zoroastrianism, the Jewish religion, and Christianity. But he felt that it was good and evil, but that evil would pronounce and conquer the good. He felt that anything which was material was bad. Anything that was spiritual was good. He went all over Asia, greater part of Asia, and returned back to Persia, to the Sasanian Empire. The Zoroastrian priests obviously hated him. They managed to get him into the court of Behram I. He was imprisoned. He was killed. Some say that he was killed by heavy weights being placed on him day by day till he was crushed to death. Others say that he was just decapitated. Others say that he was flayed. And others say that his head was cut off and his head displayed on a stake. Let me go to the 4th century. The salient events in the 4th century was that the Armenians and Armenia, which was at north straddling both the empires of Rome and the Persian empires, the people there changed their religion. They were Zoroastrians for centuries, but their king became Christian, and therefore many of the elite Armenians became Christian. Therefore there was a great divide, a great schism in Armenia, and there were fights between the two groups of Armenians. There were also fights outside Armenia, for the Persians declared war on Rome because of Armenia. Armenia remained a bone of contention all through the time, right up to the 7th century. There were numerous fights between one and the other. In the end, the Persians decided to partition Armenia, a part belonging to Rome and a part belonging to the Persian Empire. Another event outside not concerning the Persian Empire, was King Constantine. King Constantine won the Battle of the Million Bridge, using the cross as his banner. He defeated Maximidius, who was also contending as being the emperor of Rome. He won, and he divides his rule now, becoming emperor, between Rome and Byzantium. And finally shifts his power center to Byzantium, which became a big city and which was called ultimately Constantinople, meaning the city of Constantine. Constantine, I think, went to Byzantium and to Constantinople in 330 AD. He had a great plan to invade the Sasanian Empire and destroy it. And he was really a great emperor. I don't think he never lost a battle. He was a clever, politically very suave emperor. Unfortunately, he couldn't do so because he died sometime around 337 AD or so. Now, Shapur II, who became emperor, king of kings, was also a mighty emperor. Won't describe his battles, but he won battle after battle. He might have lost a few battles to the Roman emperor, but the last battle before he died was a great battle. It was against the emperor Justin. Elephants were reined on either side. It was a great struggle. Shapur II won. The Roman emperor Justin was wounded in battle, and they say he went back to his tent and died in his tent. So that was Shapur II. Now Shapur II was followed by his son, Shapur III. now start a series of assassinations which might frighten you. Shahrukh III went on a hunt, and the assassins, it was a huge, big, heavy hunt, a huge, big tent in which he was staying. The assassins let the big tent drop on him, and he was smothered to death. Shahrukh III's son was Bahram. He went on a hunt, and it is said that during the hunt, an arrow killed him by accident. Almost certainly, this was also an assassination. So now we've finished with the 4th century. I come to the 5th century. I'd like to just review the positions of both the empires at this point in time. In the 5th century, the beginning of the 5th century, Rome was still a very powerful empire. But certainly more powerful when you compare it to its neighbors, but on a par with the Sasanians. Sasanians were on a par with Rome. But by the end of the 5th century, the western dominions of Rome no longer existed. The western empire of Rome had collapsed. What is the reason? I don't have to go into the discussion on that, but just a pointer. Gibbons says that the people of Rome could not serve two authorities. They could not serve the emperor of Rome, and they could not serve Christianity. They chose Christianity. Toynbee says no, it was the canker, the cancer within the Rome and within the Roman Empire. There was absolutely hopeless rule within Rome. Clans fighting with each other, plunder, murders. That was the basic cause. The external proletariat waited patiently. That was the time when they pounced upon the Roman Empire and destroyed it. Alaric the Goth sacked Rome in 420. Saint Augustine, who wrote after that, wrote a good book called the Book of God, of the Kingdom of God, told the Romans, believe me, Romans, your capital is not Rome, your capital is heaven. It's strange that one emperor, Roman emperor, followed one after the other. One debacle went from one to the other, from bad to worse. And Rome, as an empire of the West, had completely gone. But Constantinople remained. And emperors in Constantinople remained ruling for till 15th century when Constantinople fell. It's worth remembering that Constantine was baptized as a Christian on his deathbed. Yet Rome was not Christian at that time. Christianity began in Rome with the Emperor Theodosius, which was about 30, 40 years after the death of Constantine. When you compare the Sasanian Persians with the Romans, what do you find? They were very much the same. They had a monarch who was absolute. They had a very good bureaucracy, each of them. They had a religion which was sponsored, protected by the emperor. They had a standing army. They had a religion which was very strong and powerful, each of them. But they had also the same difficulties. The difficulties were the invasion of the nomads, particularly from the northeast. There were the Hephthalites and the Kidirites, and from the south the Arabs, and later on the Turks. That was a common problem with them. There was also the problem during when the king died and there was an ascension to the king, again a throne open and people wanting the throne. Those who wore the crown were not happy. Happiness was not there with the crown. Many an individual who wanted the crown was murdered. And even when an emperor was crowned, it was not easy for him to stay alive. He was often killed. The same was in Rome, I believe. It was just not in the Sasanian Empire. And then the Huns. the Kidarites, the Hephthalites. How did they deal with them? They both dealt with them in the same way. They either fought them, they bribed them, or they protected their kingdoms by building fortifications and walls. That's how they went on. Now let me tell you some of the happenings of the emperors in Rome. And you have Yazdegerd the First, who was the son of Shamur the Third. Yazdegerd the First was a very peaceful man. On his coins he printed Sasanian, Mazdiasni in religion, wanting peace. I think he was very afraid of assassination. His previous two emperors, as I told you, had been assassinated. So he kept peace with Rome. And he kept peace with the Hephthalites, the nomads, by bribing them. He goes to the north of his kingdom to try and make peace with the Kidarites, also another nomadic tribe, allied to the Hephthalites. And then he's assassinated, poor chap. So that was the Yazdegerd. Now there's an interesting story. I found it fascinating. Yazdegerd the First had three children. 3 sons. The first son was assassinated. The second son couldn't get to the throne. Therefore, the nobles and the clergy decided that we'll make a royal prince from the Sasanian blood. We'll choose him as the king. But he had Yazdegerd the third. First, I told you had a third son. That son had been banished by the father to the south to live amongst the Arabs. When he heard that his father had died, with an Arab army and with Sasanians who were faithful to him, he marches on and claims the throne. That's justified. The clergy and the nobles had a problem. Who do we choose? We ask this man to become king, and now this man who is really a descendant of the king wants to become king. That's all right. We will have a contest. The one who wins the contest will be king. It is the strangest sort of contest that you would think of. You would never imagine this sort of a contest would exist ever. The contest was that the regalia of the emperor, his clothes, his crown, his sword, spear, his mace, were all placed in the middle. And 2 hungry lions were placed on either side. And the contest was the man who went and picked up these regalias and brought them back would be king. The man who had come from the south, living in the Arab today, was a huge man. He had a mace which no ordinary person could lift. He said, I am going in first. He went in, clubbed the first lion to death. From the corner of his eye, he saw the other lion pouncing upon him, turned round with great speed, clubbed the other lion to death. Won the regalia, becomes king. What a strange contest. Not a fight with swords or spears or fight on horseback, but fight between 2 hungry lions. Anyway, he was a good king. And he again fought the nomads very well, defeating them. These were the main problems with the empires. But will you believe it? At the age of 34, they say, history says, that he died in his sleep. Can't imagine a man who buffets 2 lions with 2 strokes, so strong, goes to sleep and wakes up dead. But that's how it is. Probably was poisoned, probably ate too much, probably had a heart attack, no one knows. But they presumably, they say he might have been assassinated. So Bahram is dead. We are coming to the end of the 5th century, but not quite. After Yazdegerd the First, there was Yazdegerd the Second, who came was a very brilliant warrior. Again, the fight really was not in the Romans with all the nomadic tribes that tried to encroach upon the Sasanian Empire. He died. And his son, Farokh, becomes the emperor. But he becomes the emperor with the help of the Hephthalites, who provide him money, who provide him an army. That's how he doesn't allow his elder brother to become king. He becomes king. Albania secedes from the Sasanian kingdom. The Hephthalites again give him an army, and the Albanians come back into the Sasanian army. So he was entirely in the grip of the Hephthalites. When he's ensconced as emperor, he decides that I have to free myself. My honor is besmirched by being in the grip of these Hephthalites. So he fights them. There were 3 big fights. He's defeated every time. The Hephthalites would slowly lure them into their land. Mind you, they were not settlements. They were just their land. That was what they said. And then they would encircle him and defeat him. In the second fight, they held his son as hostage. He had to pay a huge indemnity to release his son. The third fight was the worst. The Hephthalites said, all right, I want to make peace. You do not enter my territory, and I will not enter your territory. He refused. He went with a huge army. And this time I'm going to win. Hephthalites warned him, you've broken the truce, so beware. What did they do? It was an amazing thing again. Far away, they knew in his path, they dug a huge trench, very, very long, very, very wide, and very, very deep. And when the soldiers, and in those days, the soldiers, the king and his royal soldiers, royal on horseback, would be riding in front. They fell into that, and they were all dead. There was only one who survived. His name was Kavan, and he becomes the king. We come to the 6th and 7th centuries. Kavan was a remarkable man. He fell under the influence of a horrid priest. His name was Mazak. He was a man who preached a communist doctrine which would beat Karl Marx hollow. Everything was common. Granaries from the rich were given to the poor. Everything was common. And there was great disturbance in the kingdom. Ultimately, he said all women are also common, so nobody knew who was who. There was a great trouble in that part of in the Sasanian Empire at that time. The nobles captured him and put him in a prison. That prison they called by a beautiful name, the prison of oblivion. Isn't that a nice name? But his sister and the Hephthalites allowed him to escape. He comes back. This time he rules reasonably well, but still under the thumb of the priest. When he dies, there now comes a great, great king. He's called Khusro I. He was indeed the savior of the Sasanian kingdom. He brought the Renaissance into the Sasanian kingdom. But first he had to be cruel. He took all the Mazdacs, or those who followed that prophet, or that priest, captured all of them. He had a huge big area on his own, surrounded by huge high walls. He dug holes at the edge of the walls and captured them and dug with their heads in the holes so that the heads were down and the legs were up. That was a cruel thing to do. Then he caught the priest himself and asked him to see what is happening. The priest, of course, was terrified. He was tied to a stake and was shot with a volley of arrows. Now his rule begins. He was an extraordinarily learned man. He was a philosopher in a way. And when the school of Justinian, his counterpart, who was also a great Roman emperor, when that school ended, people flocked to Khusro I. He welcomed ideas from all over, including India. The game of chess, by the way, was introduced from India to Persia in the time of Justinian and in the time of Khusro I. He asked for many things. He asked for a translation of all important treatises, medical, scientific. They were translated from Latin or Syriac or Greek into Middle Persian, a Pahlavi language. He was the first Persian emperor who asked his scribes to write the history of Persia. Please, ladies and gentlemen, I think you should know that Persians never wrote the history. The history of Persia was wrote by the Westerners, and it was written, therefore, completely prejudiced, making the Westerner great and the poor Persians, right from the time of the Cambrians and the Persian Empire, and the Persians as inferior. I might also go on further and perhaps say that it was not just the Persians who were inferior, but the Persians who were not white and not belonging to the West that were inferior. It's worth remembering that. Anyway, he was wise, he was just, he was learned. He was called Nosfiraman, which meant Khusro of the immortal soul, also called Khusro the just, also called Khusro the philosopher. His stable always and his court was filled by learned people more than by nobles and warriors. I think the Sasanian Empire, by and large, was at its zenith in the time of Khusro I. I would think he would sort of more or less be compared to a philosopher king that Plato envisaged in his discourses. But he was also a warrior. Not only defended the Roman Empire, he had a great rapport with the emperor from Rome, Justinian, who was also a great emperor. And whilst they were both there was peace for a long time. When Justinian, however, went to North Africa to expand his kingdom there, Khusro I started also to expand his own empire. He was given a large sum of money to defend the passes by the Romans. He took Syria, Cappadocia, Armenia, etc., was quite a good warrior. He had been struck by numerous illnesses many times, near to death. He was 50 now and quite old. He learns of Justinian's death and is very sad. They were on the same sort of wavelength. They made the same administrative changes by themselves in their own empires. The same changes in the military also in their own empires. But he had one wish. There was a very big fortified town on the frontier. That means between the Euphrates and the Tigris. And that was Dara. It was called Dara. And he vowed to take it because it was a great danger to the Sasanians. People from that fort, for example, would come and forage into the Sasanian Empire. So he laid siege to that. He built huge earth ramps which were burnt by the Romans. He then built huge ramps a little distance away and waited. It was winter, raining, frosty, snowing, nothing to be seen. That was the time when Khusro I asked his men to put planks from those ramps onto the walls. The Romans never expected anything like this would happen. So in the middle of the night, the soldiers go in. They win. Dara is captured. I want you to remember one great name. That great name is Bahram Shubin. Bahram in those days, now we call it Behram. Then it was Bahram Shubin. Shubin is the javelin. And he was as straight as a javelin, tall as a javelin, and was superb in warfare. And Bahram Shubin was the man who was commanding those. Khusro I was there on his horse. Bahram Shubin was the man who commanded and was responsible for the capture of Dara. He was a great soldier. So when the thing was over, Khusro I gives him command of the northeastern part of his empire. Why the northeastern? Because from there the nomads used to come. Rome was exhausted. Eastern Roman Empire exhausted. So was, in fact, the Sasanian Empire. The Romans realized what a great man Khusro I was. They sent a delegation filled with precious words, bales of 6, say what you may. telling that you are a great man. We offer you peace, we will not fight with you, and we offer you peace. They enter the capital, Sasanian. Poor Kushu I dies. It must have been the first time in history that both the Romans and the Sasanians gather around the body of this great king and lament over his loss. So that was Kushu I. Now we come to a turmoil, a period of great turmoil in Sasanian history. Kushu I was followed by a man or a king called Hormuzd. Hormuzd also the good king. He was the son of Kushu I. And he did his usual things, fighting with the Romans, keeping his borders intact. When he suddenly finds that there is an incursion from the east, not by the Heptalites or the Kiddites, but by the Turks. The Turk Sultanate had become powerful and had encroached upon the Sasanian Empire. For the first time, I think it must be that Hormuzd decided not to go into battle himself, but he asked Bayram Chubin to defend the empire. So Bayram Chubin set forth, hot, torrid, summer day, with just 20,000 Sasanian warriors. He first fights the Heptalites, who were allies of the Turks. Then he fights the Turks, 40,000 of them to 20,000. The battle is almost won. Sabah Khan, the Turk general, isolates himself on a hillock nearby. Battle is won, almost won. He must be wanting to flee. Bayram Chubin spies. He takes off his bow, he takes his arrow, and from a distance the arrow flies and kills Sabah Khan. This great arrow, this great shot has gone into legend in Persian history. I don't know why, but it's gone into legend. Firdausi, for example, in his Shahnameh, other poets, just rave about the shot. I think the only other shot which is worth raving about was when William Tell splits the apple on his son's head into half. But that was the short distance. This was a long distance, real long distance. Bayram Chubin is absolutely made out as a hero. They love him. The people sort of are mad over him. He now goes back towards Ctesiphon. And suddenly a strange thing happens. There are two stories about this. The first story is that Hormuzd the king insulted him for some small reason. And he said he was so upset that he rebelled against the king. The second story is that the Magi in that region, by sheer reading of whatever they do, said that now there is going to be a very dark period for the Sasanian Empire. But there will come a great noble called Bayram. He will get all the nobles together and the Sasanian Empire will flourish again. Maybe Bayram thought that must be him. The great king. Anyway, he rebels. When Hormuzd hears of this, he sends an army, good army, against him. The army goes over to Bayram Chubin. The general of that army is killed. Now in Ctesiphon, in the palace in Ctesiphon, who is there? Hormuzd the king, his son, Khusro, Prince Khusro, and some close followers. There is a coup now in the palace. Hormuzd, the emperor, is put into prison and assassinated. It is believed, and some historians, by many historians, that Khusro II, or rather Prince Khusro, had something to do with this regicide. Prince Khusro was trapped because Bayram Chubin, with a huge army, was camped in front of the palace, in front of the capital. What was he to do? He tried to raise forces, but no, there was no one he could get. So guess what he does? In the middle of the night, in a very, very, very dark night, he slips out of Ctesiphon. And where does he go? He goes west into Roman territory. The Roman general says to his emperor, the emperor was now Maurice, Emperor Maurice, that, sir, this prince has come into Roman territory, what shall I do? Maurice says, what does he want? Prince Khusro says, I would like to get back my throne and I would like your help to do that. He considers that for a long time. And Maurice said, okay, all right, I shall do that. In the meantime, of course, Erach enters Ctesiphon and is crowned the emperor during the time of the celebrations of Nau. This is the first time, the first individual who did not belong to the real Sasanian royalty that became an emperor of the Sasanian kingdom. Well, Emperor Maurice keeps his word. He gives him an army of 40,000 Romans. And then, surprisingly, many of the Sasanians up north come to him. They say, Erach is great, he's a hero, but he's a usurper. Haven't the Sasanian kings given us good health? Haven't they looked after us all this time for so many years? Why should he have done that? He's a usurper. So many come. Khusro II side. There is a battle. The Roman soldiers plus the Sasanians coming over against Erach and his army. Erach loses. He loses, he goes to the east, flees to the east, where he is killed either by an assassin hired by Prince Khusro or by the Turks. Khusro II comes to the throne. I think it was 591 or so, or 292. He, however, says that his term usually starts 1 year earlier, because that was the time when Emperor Maurice had helped. Emperor Maurice was his foster father. Erach comes quiet. For 10 years, nothing happened. The Romans are happy. They made him king. But for that, Mesopotamia has been given up. The fortresses on the frontier have been given up. Armenia was given up. They had their share of the pie quite easily. And then, again, a sudden disaster, why not? A seismic tremor really hits that part of the world. Emperor Maurice is murdered. How is he murdered? He was facing the Slavs, and he asked his troops to winter by the side of the Danube because it was too expensive to have them quartered within shelters. The soldiers mutiny. They get hold of the emperor. They kill all his sons, and they kill Emperor Maurice by just hanging him as a common thief. This news comes to the Sasanian palace at Ctesiphon. Khusro II was mortified. He was seething with rage. Foster father, he said, they've killed him. He told, and would you imagine, the person who killed him was an ordinary soldier, not even an officer. His name was Phocas. He becomes the emperor. That was the difference between the hereditary lineage between the Sasanian Empire and the Roman emperors, where anyone, any soldier, any officer could rise to be emperor. Well, what happens next? Khusro II calls all his generals. Who all amongst you all will be with me to teach the Romans a lesson to avenge my foster father? And a chap called Farokh Khan, not Farokh Khan, stands up and says, I will do what you wish. I will spare neither the old nor the young. And then begins the great last war of antiquity. He was a great soldier. But before that, let me describe to you Khusro II. Khusro II was undoubtedly one of the great emperors of the Sasanian Empire. For centuries, the splendor of his reign, the tumultuousness of his life, and his great victories, and then also his fall and his death, was sung by poets and bards far and near. He was a warrior of class. There was no greater warrior than him. He was called the hunter of the East, the lion of the East. Enemies trembled. People far away, enemies trembled. And people, his enemies nearby, just vanished. He was a great warrior. In his victorious days, when he won victory after victory after victory, he was like a meteor, throwing a blazing light on the Sasanian kingdom. But then, like a meteor, he fell to the ground with a resounding crash, bringing death, despair, and darkness, not only to himself, but also to his empire. He was a man also who loved life. He would, when not warring, when not battling, he would be feasting, he would be hunting, he would be fine, he loved life. He also loved and lusted for women. He had numerous concubines, numerous mistresses and wives. He lusted for many, but he loved just one, and that was Shireen. The love story of Shireen and Khusro, rather Khusro and Shireen, have gone into legends, been written about by numerous poets, numerous Persian poets, particularly by a poet called Niazmi and of course Ferdowsi. Now what happens? What about his battles? He is unbeatable. He beats the Romans every time. Not a single legion can stand up. And then comes the denouement. Heraclius was the emperor at that time. He was going to North Africa to increase his dominions there. They told him, no, for God's sake, stop this man. He comes via the Dead Sea, sails through the Dead Sea, goes into Armenia, and strikes with his fresh legions into the heart of the Sasanian kingdom. He had overstretched himself, Khusro II. He couldn't hold what he had conquered. And Heraclius and his legions now take back everything that Khusro II had won. He was defeated. He couldn't fight him because he had no men to fight him. People were some there, some wet part. He's defeated. In the end, he's pursued and he killed. I must tell you the story now of Shireen and Khusro. This is what Niazmi says about Shireen. She was a princess from Armenia, Christian, extremely beautiful, tall and slender like the cypress tree. I'm almost quoting his words. The eyes of a dove, the walk of a gazelle. None could resist her. She resisted Khusro for a long, long time, but at last he gave in. Khusro does not marry her. The excuse being that I am a Mazda, you're a Christian, my religion doesn't permit it. Ultimately, he gave way to his scruples, forgot his scruples and did marry her. He married her and he even gave her a child and he allowed her to build a convent near the palace. I forgot to tell you that Khusro is killed. Khusro II ultimately is killed after he's defeated. So then, what happened to Shireen after the death and assassination of Khusro? It's quite interesting. His assassination was participated in by his wretched son, Gabad II. Horrible thing to do. And this horrible man asks Shireen to marry him, which she refuses. She says, I am in mourning, I am in mourning, I am in mourning. She stabs herself and falls dead near the body of Khusro. They're buried together in one grave. That's the story of Khusro and Shireen. I have a feeling perhaps that Shakespeare might have read this so that he could write his story on Romeo and Juliet. Well, now, there was chaos. Khusro dead. What was to happen to the empire? There were two sisters who for a time being came to the throne. Chaos. And then the clergy decided on making Yazdegerd III as the king. He was a young man, boy of about 12 or 14. He was called the roaming emperor. He came at a bad time, the Arab onslaught. They ran to the Sasanian Empire, destroying it. The only great battle was the great battle of Qadiseh. Again, a great battle where Rustam headed the Persian troops. Not Rustam and Sohrab, mind you. Rustam headed the troops. And Khalid was the general. Abu Bakr was the caliph. This was a great battle. The elephants were on Rustam's side. And the story goes, they made the elephants charge the Arabs. The Arabs goaded it with their spears, the elephants turned them around, and they went back to the Sasanian side. The Sasanian is the same. And this went on for some time. And it was sheer bad luck, fate, destiny. The elephants broke through the Sasanian line. And that was the end of that battle. The Arabs won. They won every battle after that. They decimated the Arabian Empire. They came into Pars, and for the first time, the Persians in Pars were persecuted. And some of us took to the boats and went away and landed on the western coast of India, where we were given protection. And where we responded with everything we could do for the country that adopted us and became our motherland. Mind you, they didn't stop with the Sasanian Empire, they truncated the Roman Empire. They went into Africa, and from Africa went into Spain, and from Spain went into France. And it was only when Charles Martel, the founder of the Gallic Empire of France, in the Battle of Poitiers in 735, that Charles Martel defeated the Arab cavalry. It was the first time in history that the infantry could defeat a strong cavalry. If it had not been so, I think the whole of Western Europe might have become under Islam. Let me just conclude, please. Sasanians and the Roman Empire lived in uneasy coexistence. But there was not always wars. There was friendliness between them. There was culture between them. There were sort of camaraderie between them, trade between them. So it's not just always wars. But what extremely struck me, that the Roman Empire, particularly in the time of Augustus and a few empires, why couldn't they have overcome the Sasanian Empire? For two reasons. I think one of the Sasanian Empire was Aryan Zoroastrian, not Semitic. The rest of the Eastern, Middle East and early East are all Semites. They have a different language. These were Aryan Zoroastrians who were coerced into becoming Islamic. That was what the difference was. There was a genetic difference. Also, they must have felt that what is the advantage perhaps of overcoming a big empire who could fight so well, who could fight our legions almost as well as anybody else, more than anyone else. What was the advantage of holding them Wouldn't it be a great strain on the Roman economy, particularly after the western half of the Roman Empire was no more? That was probably the reason. Yes, the Sasanian Empire was decimated, shall we say, it ceased to exist. But what struck me again was Persian culture went on. The Persian culture from pre-Islamic times continues right to the present day. Those of you who've been to Persia, you will find that the months are Zoroastrian, that their celebrations are Zoroastrian. Nowruz is not an Arabic celebration, it is a Persian celebration. Other customs are not Arabic, they are Zoroastrian, pre-Islamic. If you look at the people, they are so kind, they're so gentle, so civilized. You don't find that in the rest of the Middle East. So the Persian culture persisted, and I asked myself, why? Why did it persist right now the same this time? And I think there were three factors. One was the language. The Persian language from the Middle Persian was changed in 2 centuries to a beautiful Persian language, beautifully sounding, and from the 10th century onwards to the present day, this language is there. And language is often a pillar of a civilization. What was the second reason? I think the second reason was Firdowsi's Shahnameh. This is read still by Persians, even though they may be Islamic. What was the Shahnameh? It was the lengthiest literature in world languages. It would put Homer's Odyssey and Iliad in the shade. It had 50,000 couplets. It had 64 chapters, and it had so many other stories, all written in verse. It was a mixture of folklore, poetry, history, culture, beautifully presented in verse. It was like a landscape of culture, which the Persians could look at. What is more, it spoke of great kings and queens of ancient times, not just academic times, much more earlier than academic times also. What is it called? The name, I forgot the name. That era, where they spoke of incidents in that era derived from various sources and pieced together also by different sources. Firdowsi wrote it so that the Persians were aware of what their culture was, and the future generations of them could also look back and see what their culture was. Spoke of heroism, of courage, of love, of honesty. It spoke of every possible aspect of human existence. So in fact, when you read it, you find that it doesn't really belong to Persia. It belongs really to the whole world. Yes, the Sasanian Empire was destroyed. But both the Roman and the Sasanian empires had made a great establishment of the art and ritual of great kingship. They built a prototype that was followed not just by the Byzantines, but by the Umayyads, by the Abbasids, by the Mongol Khans, by the Turk Sultans, by the Russian Tsars, and even by the Mughal emperors of India. The march of history really is a chronicle of change. Empires may rise and fall. And from the rubble of the old, like a phoenix, may arise the new. Past ages have perished, and ages in the future will also perish. Nothing lasts last forever in this world. That is the law of the universe. The old order changes, yielding place to new, and God fulfilleth himself in many ways, lest one good custom should corrupt the world. The old order established, in essence, the meaning of true kingship. A meaning of true kingship which was followed by the newer emerging countries in that age. Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Udwadia. You are a living encyclopedia. What do I say? There is nothing to add. Many congratulations on the launch of your book. Your work, which captures the 700-year-old rivalry. Actually, I was calculating chronologically, you covered 800. But the rivalry, the history 700-year-old between ancient Rome and the Parthian and Sasanian empires for dominance in the Near East brings to life one of the most complex historical episodes of conflict, migration, and mutual trade. Its insights are more relevant today than ever before. We are pleased to inform you, this is very important for all of you to know, that the CSMBS Museum will be opening its new study gallery of India and the ancient world to the public on 13th December. And to my mind, this is going to be the first ancient world gallery in India. This rich collection has been made possible through contributions from 15 iconic global and domestic museums. You will certainly, Dr. Udwadia, you will certainly encounter elements of the very history you explore so vividly in your book within this gallery. Congratulations once again, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you all. Thank you.
Dr. Udwadia, dignitaries on the dais, and friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a double whammy for me today to have the privilege of now introducing my dear friend and valued professional colleague, namely Darius Kamata. Darius is one of the most eminent senior counsel practicing not only in the Supreme Court of India, but also in the Bombay High Court and other courts and tribunals across the country, and furthermore in arbitration both in India and abroad. His initial education was in the University of Bombay, and thereafter he went to the USA and he secured his LLM degree from the Harvard School of law. Daraz has held two distinguished public offices. First, as Additional Solicitor General of India, and thereafter as the Advocate General for Maharashtra. When he demitted office as the Advocate General, the government of Maharashtra is on record thanking him and recording its highest appreciation for the meritorious and distinguished service rendered by him as Advocate General. Daraz requires no introduction, as with his large and varied practice and his appearance in numerous constitutional, corporate, commercial, tax, and environmental law issues, he has made himself a household name in Mumbai. He has published several articles in professional journals, and together with his researched arguments in several matters, he has been conferred with the Arya Chanakya Puraskar Award for Law, the Senior Counsel of the Year by Legal Era, and he's finally also been awarded the Living Legend of Law Award by the Bar Association of India. His lectures at several national and international conferences have been acknowledged truly as well-researched material on various topics. These have also made him internationally sought after. He has been the Vice President of the London Court of International Arbitration. He's a member of the Singapore Arbitration Center. He's a member of the Board of Trustees of the Bahrain Chamber of Dispute Resolution. He's on the Advisory Council of the Maharashtra National Law University at Bombay. And he's a member of One Essex Court, a leading set of commercial chambers in the UK. Daraz, with his genial personality, his ever-smiling manner, and his integrity and persuasive advocacy, and being a loving family man, makes him an all-round human being respected by all. He has also extensively undertaken pro bono litigation. Trusteeships include the trusteeship of the MC Chadla Memorial Trust, the HM Silvai Memorial Trust, the National Center for Performing Arts, and trustees of Sir Dorab Tata Trust and Sir Ratan Tata Trust. I will not stand any more between you and Daraz, whom I will now request to deliver his talk, which you all are eagerly waiting for. Thank you.
My very dear Farokh uncle, dear Farokh uncle, and dear Viranti, Homa, Dr. Nawaz Modi, ladies and gentlemen, how does one follow the monumental 1 hour, I can't even call it a speech, a treatise given by Farokh uncle, without a note in his hand, traversing us through centuries of history. He is truly a polymath. He's done it again. Every few months or years, he reminds us of his great talent. He's an architect, not a working mason, to paraphrase Sir Walter Scott. He believes that to achieve excellence in his profession and in any profession, you need more than just an exhaustive knowledge or even a brilliant mind, and he has both. You need an understanding and appreciation of other streams of learning, particularly of the arts, of music, and of history. Unless you have some knowledge of history, you will be like a traveler without a map, not knowing where you've come from and not able to define your journey. But if you really aspire to a destination, then you must be like Janus, the Roman god, the two-eyed god. One eye looking forward, but the other eye firmly anchored in the past. His book, and I've had the opportunity of going through it briefly, is really a tale of the two superpowers of that age, and ultimately about how one was destroyed and the other declined into relative obscurity. These were superpowers who shared land borders, you've heard that. But the story of their rivalry is relevant even today, when trade, information, technology, and most important, ideas transcend geographical boundaries. And just to put relative time frames into perspective, this ancient rivalry spanned about 8 centuries. The Cold War after World War II lasted for 45 years. On each side of this great ancient rivalry were actually two empires. On the Persian side, as you've heard, were the Parthian and then the Sasanian Empire. And on the Roman side, there was of course always Rome. But Rome was first the undivided empire, later with two capitals, one in Rome, one in Constantinople, and ultimately the Byzantine Empire. The Parthians originated from Parthia. And what is Parthia? It's a region northeastern Iran. It covers a bit of that, it covers a bit of Afghanistan and even Turkmenistan. The Parthians were not from Parsa, which was the home of the Achaemenids. And they were not, therefore, the forerunners of the Parsis. It was Mithridates who first expanded Parthia by conquering Media in about 147 BC. He then, of course, took Pars and ultimately Cappadocia. Now, this is an important time because at the same time, Rome, which was still a republic, was expanding its own empire. When I say Rome was a republic, it was not a constitutional democracy. It was ruled by a senate, to which were appointed members of the patrician landholding families of Rome. Male members, of course. It had already fought the first of the two Punic Wars with its Mediterranean rival Carthage. If you recall, in the Second War, Hannibal of Carthage was finally and emphatically defeated by a Roman general called Scipio, who was then named Scipio Africanus at the Battle of Zama. But this was sometime around 200-201 BC. Thereafter, Carthage never actually regained its military power, but it became a very prosperous trading power. Its trading reach traversed the entire Mediterranean. Sometime in 154 BC, the Roman senator Cato, I think it was Cato the Elder, visited Carthage to settle some dispute between the Carthaginians and the Numidians. And he saw for himself the prosperity of Carthage. And he also saw that they really had no military capability. When he got back to Rome, in speech after speech, he declaimed Carthago delenda est. We must destroy Carthage. And ultimately, at about the same time as Mithridates invaded Media, between 148 and 146 BC, the Romans laid siege to Carthage for 3 years, and ultimately in 146 BC, sacked it and completely razed it to the ground. And the lesson we can still learn from this is that to have a prosperous economy without a strong defense is an invitation to invaders. So now you have two empires, the Roman eagle, which reigns supreme over the Mediterranean, and the Parthian archer, because that was their national symbol, the archer, which held sway over Asia. Farokh uncle has told you about the Parthian horse archers who were famous for the Parthian shot. Look it up in the Oxford Dictionary, you'll find it defined there. Where they could swing round while they were seemingly retreating from the enemy, galloping away, they could suddenly swing round and let loose a hail of arrows on their unsuspecting foe. That's the Parthian shot, the parting shot, now perverted in English. The Parthians were Zoroastrians. In fact, their king Bologese, the first, commissioned the first codification of Zoroastrian prayers and texts, and also started compiling what they call the law against demons, the Vendivihat, what we today refer to as the Vendidat. This was more a moral code of conduct. It has chapters on things like taxation, how to run one's life, how to live and conduct yourself. It was like a Leviticus, a practical ethos, not really in that sense a purely religious text. Now Rome and Parthia had running feuds. Their boundaries intersected at Asia Minor and later the Euphrates. And Armenia, as you've heard, was often a bone of contention. This brings me to that great incident which Farokh uncle has covered, so I won't trouble you much with it, which is in 54 BC, when the Roman general Marcus Crassus was appointed governor of Syria. Now, who was Crassus? Crassus was initially, in his young days, a supporter of the Roman dictator Sulla. You may know Sulla, 88 BC, conquered Rome, and briefly Rome ceased to be a republic and became a dictatorship. But thereafter, after Sulla, he continued in power. He was the general who put down the Spartacus revolt in 71 BC. And one gory detail of that is, he had all those slaves crucified along the Appian Way all the way to Rome. There was a whole line for miles and miles of crucified slaves. He then became a triumvirate that ruled Rome. You had Crassus, of course, you had Julius Caesar, and you had Pompey Magnus, Pompey the Great. But sometime in 54 BC, Caesar went off to conquer Gaul. Pompey went into Spain, and Crassus decided that he needed a military victory which his other two rivals didn't have. He didn't have. So he got himself appointed as governor of Syria to solve the Parthian problem. By this time, though Crassus was a very rich man, he was also very old and tired. He met the Parthians in this battle at Carrhae. The Parthian general Surena, the Parthians were outnumbered completely, but they had this cavalry. And you heard how first Marcus Crassus' son, Publius Crassus, was decapitated, and then Crassus himself, in the parleys or negotiations, was beheaded. Now this leads to a very interesting story. His severed head was sent back by Surena to the Parthian capital. It happened to arrive one evening when the Parthian king, Oredes, was entertaining the king of Armenia, and there was an evening of revelry. And one of the things that was organized for that evening was a play by Euripides called the Bacchae. The Bacchae was the story of how the Roman god Bacchus, Dionysius, flew into a rage against the king of Thebes because he felt the king of Thebes had insulted him. And he organized a set of women to capture the king of Thebes and ultimately decapitate him, he put the mother of the king of Thebes, Agave, into a trance and sent her back to Thebes, holding the head of her son, the king of Thebes. Now, when Crassus's head came during this revelry, they actually used it as a stage prop in this play. Is it true? We don't know, but that's what Plutarch and others tell us. Gory. But after that, the Romans never crossed the Euphrates. Ultimately, as we've heard, the Parthians were deposed by Adisha I, a dynasty of Sasan, the Sasanians, and they adopted the Achaemenid symbol of the lion. So you now had, earlier you had the eagle versus the archer, now you had the eagle versus the lion. The Sasanians ruled over a similar territorial empire as the Parthians. And as you've heard, Shapur I defeated 3 Roman emperors. Gordian I, who was taken captive, and then he died in the battle. And Philip the Great, Philip the Arab brother, paid a ransom, got away, but then in a subsequent battle was killed by Shapur I. And Shapur promptly went and defaced the necropolis at Nakshe Rustam by carving out on a frieze on that rock where you have the tombs of Darius the Great, Xerxes and Artaxerxes. At the bottom, you have Shapur sitting on a horse and the 2 Roman emperors, Gordian and Philip the Arab, in supplication before him. And apparently recently, they've erected a statue in some square in Tehran depicting the same moment to show victory over the West. Later, he defeated a 3rd Roman emperor, Valerian. But then his conduct did not become a monarch. It is said that he used poor Valerian as a footstool to mount his horse for 20 years. Then he had him flayed, killed, and stuffed, mummified as a trophy for him. Now that carving at Nakshe Rustam also has an important other symbol. Behind Shapur I in the corner is someone with his finger up. You will see it on the reverse of Farokh Uncle's book. And that was the high priest Kirtir, who we've just heard about. Now Kirtir established Zoroastrianism as a state religion, and he enforced a very strict and orthodox version of Zoroastrianism at that time. These were great high priests. Later in the era of Shapur II, you had Adalbad Maraspan, who actually codified Zoroastrian prayers, compiled our Kasti prayer from existing texts. And by then, of course, the state language was no longer Avesta, it was Pahlavi. In Rome, the emperor aspired to be God, because it was a pagan religion. There was never really a division between church and state. Emperors were often proclaimed as gods after they died. And this ethos of a state religion continued even when Constantine claimed to have seen a flaming cross in the sky, in the heavens, which was probably more of a political maneuver than some genuine transformation of belief. And he, of course, Constantine, convened the famous Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, and that is the council which put together the Gospels, determined that Christ was actually the Son of God and therefore divine, and actually established the celebration of Easter. The Sasanians were equally devout as Zoroastrians, sometimes too devout. Yazdegerd II forced mass conversions to Zoroastrianism in Armenia, which was Christian, on pain of death. In fact, this was probably the first Armenian genocide, well before the genocide by the Turks in 1917. Rome, as you've heard, splintered into the western and eastern parts. The eastern was always far richer. And there was even a northern emperor at Trier for several years, for almost a century actually. The Visigoths under Alaric in 410 AD first sacked Rome, and by 455 the Vandals destroyed it completely. But the Eastern Empire, with Constantinople as its capital, continued as the Byzantine Empire. In the West, there were various attempts to revive the empire in the form of the Holy Roman Empire. But, and this is sometimes ascribed to Voltaire, sometimes ascribed to Dr. Jehan Setna, it was famously said that the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman, nor even an empire. It was a loose confederation. The head just took the title of Holy Roman Emperor. Farokh uncle has told us about the good, soft interactions between these two paths. They were not always at war. There was interaction in art, culture, trade. Justinian, of course, who wrote his famous Code of Laws. Justinian and Khusru I had a mutual respect, who lamented the death of Justinian. Khusru II was actually adopted by the Byzantine Emperor Maurice when he rushed to him in 591 saying, "My empire has been now usurped by Behram Chobin. Give me an army to go back and conquer it," which Maurice did. The Sasanians reached the zenith of their territorial empire, ironically, in the early part of the 7th century, just years before their tumultuous defeat and end. And that was under Khusru II, Khusru Parvez, the exalted one. After taking over his empire in 592, and it was rather like Humayun rushed to Iran, got an army from Persia and came back to reconquer India. So did Khusru Parvez. And for the first time in hundreds of years, Khusru Parvez expanded the Sasanian Empire almost to the boundaries of the Achaemenium. So he got the Levant, he conquered Jerusalem. It is said that he claimed to have taken possession of the Holy Cross. This is a claim made by a Parsi after that only centuries later, but that's for another day. And then he laid siege to Constantinople itself. And because of the massive walls of Constantinople, he was not able to break through. A treaty was signed, the Holy Cross was dutifully returned, but both the empires were exhausted. Two great powers had thrown themselves at each other, and they both lay spent and vulnerable. It was then that a third force struck. Arab armies charged with the message of Islam swept into Persia. The Sasanians, as we've heard, had a succession of emperors after Khusru Parvez, who died in 628 AD. And Yazdegerd III ascended the throne in 634, a boy of 8 years old. Battles of Qadisiyah and Naharavan sealed the fate of Persia and buried for some time its graceful, civilized, and cultured way of life that had given so much to the world. But that culture continued in homes and hearts and was ultimately recognized and revived by the great Firdausi in his Shahnameh. During those 2 centuries, several Persian customs and rituals were absorbed into Islam. Now, the Arabs also prayed 5 times a day. They turned in a particular direction, but this time to Mecca, not to the east. And they washed before entering their places of worship. On the other side, the Byzantine Empire was also much defeated by the Arabs, who went all the way right up to modern-day Turkey. But it sputtered on till Mehmed the Conqueror breached its impregnable walls, as you know, in 1453, the fall of Constantinople. And I wonder, was it an accident of fate that his ancestors came from Turkmenistan, from the land of the Parthians? I wonder whether that was an accident of fate. This, of course, as you know, cut off the West's land routes to the land of spices, India. In those days, the richest land in the world. And the West had to then turn to find new shipping routes to India. So you had Bartholomew Dias, who went round the Cape of Good Hope, Vasco da Gama, who ultimately found his way to Calicut, and the supreme accident of fate, Christopher Columbus, in his search for India, landed up in what is today Puerto Rico, and he founded the New World. So sprang the new superpowers, the colonialists and ultimately America, from the ashes of the old. History teaches you these lessons. And history teaches you that there is so much learning to be had. I think Farokh Uncle's book is revelatory. It's, from what I can see, very easy to read. It promises to be a great treasure. But I think The greater treasure we honor today is Farokh uncle himself. Amongst the last words that both my parents had before they died was, they thanked Farokh uncle saying, Farokh, thank you for looking after us. Yes. And I think that's a sentiment that most of us, if not all of us in this room and beyond, will always express. So let us applaud and celebrate the real treasure in this room. That is Farokh uncle, who has impacted so positively so many hundreds and thousands of lives. That is a great contribution to history, greater even than this wonderful work that we are here to release. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daraz. The speech which you made was indeed not only educated but represents the feelings of all of us here, because all of us have been in contact with Dr. Farokh Udwadia and been healed by him in various ways. Just to give you some details of the effort which Dr. Udwadia took for this book, right after the publication of the first book, he started talking about the fact that there's not enough work done on the period of Parthian history. And at that time, we started collecting material for him. He must have read dozens of books in this field, at least 100 articles recently published in various journals, thanks to our friend Burzin Wagmar, who is as the library assistant in the School of Oriental and African Studies. And we got, I would say, heaps and heaps of material and books, which resulted in this very unique piece of work. And the Kama Oriental Institute is really privileged to be able to publish this particular book. The visuals also, sourced by Burzin and Dr. Rohan Srivastava, who is here, the maps, the drawings, because they really illustrate and present the work the text in a proper perspective. The whole work of writing and rewriting was done so rapidly, I would say, by Dr. Udwadia. I think Vera was part of a writing which went into 2 a.m. in the night after a long day in the hospital, irrespective of time and date, but it was completed. Mr. Neeraj Chauhan typed out the work, and we at the Kama were with Dr. Khyati Shah and others reviewing it and correcting it and making it as Daraz pointed out. The language is so simple because many authors today look a lot of jargon. The language of the book is so simple. It is understood by almost everyone. Many authors and researchers add so much jargon that it becomes difficult to read, let alone understand. And that's the advantage of this book, because it's simple, it is able to reach out to large sections of the audience, and I'm sure it will be very well.
Burzin, he works in the Afro-Asian University in London, who helped me with a lot of things, particularly with the spellings, with the spellings at that time, which we would write. Degan, for example, the small landowners of Persia, Dehgan, spelled in a peculiar way. Dehgan was italics, but you made it plural, the S was not italics. God alone knows, but this is how it should be written. And he made many such corrections. I must thank everyone. I must thank Khyati, I must thank Rohan, please, for putting this together. Will you please give them a hand? I must thank Dr. Modi as well. She was instrumental in, not pushing me to write. I wrote it myself, but she was the one who helped me with very small things all the time so that the work could be completed. I thank my wife, Veera, for putting up with me. And bearing with me the time which I had to spend over the book, that time which I didn't spend with her, but now I'm making up for it. And I thank you all of you all, for being so kind enough to come and grace the occasion. Daraja, thank you for your nice words. You to my dear friend Oma, thank you for your nice words. And thank you, Dr. Modi, please.
So I will close the session now just to inform you that we are selling the book here at a very special price of 1,600, and if some of you are interested, please go ahead and keep it as a treasure. Thank you very much.